Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Good evening, my viewers. I'm happy to present this show to you again today, but on a much more somber note. As you can see, we promoted this program, this show today, on the theme of the recent events in America, with the fallout of the killing of George Floyd, the African American man who was pinned down by a white police officer in Minneapolis and who died in police custody. And that somber note is made this evening because this is not an isolated issue, and it has been the subject of debate, of writing and commentary, of theatre, drama and politics, and of strife, and also desire for unity in America for many decades. And why do we make this the subject of this book club today? It is because it's a topical issue, and because a lot has been said and written, but not much been done about the state of the African American people in America today. It is important to kind of review around the literature that's been going on for many centuries around this issue. And that opening chorus was done by the Glee Club of Morehouse College in Atlanta. Of course, Morehouse College being one of the foremost black universities in America. So that was a very poignant rendition by the Glee Club, and it goes to the tradition of that gospel rendition that tries to assert the desire, the hope, and the spirit to rise above and achieve freedom ultimately out of the bondage that the black person, African American, has been put in for many centuries in America. How do I want to tackle this matter today around the literature around it? It was quite a lot to think about in terms of trying to formulate the approach to it. But going through my archives and doing some research, I was able to find some topical pieces that can take us into this issue around the state of the African American in America today, the brutality of the police, and the antecedents behind it. Thank you, Isaac, for joining today. Where did I start looking at the literature? What first came to me going through my library was this book, which is the Great Speeches of the 20th Century. Why is this book topical? Of course, you'll find that the speech that was given by Martin Luther King is there, it's prominently there. And that is the speech where it talks about "I have a dream." You must remember that Dr. King spent his life trying to fight for civil rights and the political and social emancipation of the African American. But what has been the legacy? Of course, now we have Martin Luther King Day. We've had the first black president in America. But it is important also to try and find what is the root of these constant underclassing of the black person in America. So from this book, which is from the speech given by the famous "I Have a Dream" speech by Martin Luther King, one of the things that came out of that speech, which I will mention now, is in relation to the Houston police chief who expressed his frustration about first of all, about President Trump making a mess of the situation, inflaming the situation, and also then trying to categorize the people on the streets, trying to find out the good and the bad people. The genuine concerns are there, which is what Dr. King was emphasizing in his speech. But one thing that Dr. King mentioned in his book, and the one that resonates is very similar to what the good police cop was saying, is something that we'll treat that issue as part of what is going to happen next. So I don't want to jump the gun and go ahead of myself. So I think I will leave this for now. But I think it's important to note that in these great speeches of the 20th century, I recommend someone should have it. There are only two speeches by two black people there. I don't think there's a guess as to who the second person is. Is, of course, Nelson Mandela. And I think the significance of that is that when somebody assembles the two greatest speeches of the 20th century, the two people that are enlisted in that volume are two black people who are talking about the deprivation of humanity and dignity to their people, and people who suffered enormously at great personal cost. Of course, Dr. King was assassinated in 1968, but President Mandela spent 27 years in jail under the apartheid system. Now, thank you very much, friends, for coming in today. So I hope we can, if anybody wants to make a contribution, I think I got my phone here today. The telephone number is on the screen on the page, so you can find it and give me a call or WhatsApp or directly if you can, so we can have a chat and put some contribution to it. So it's important for me to know that kind of resonance about the most significant issue about the black person, African American, in the 20th century and in the 21st century now is about the underclass mentality, apartheid in South Africa, and the marginalization on a global level of black people, and of course in America, the direct assault on black people. So we'll leave that for now. So that's a nice book to have. Then, as I was doing my some more thinking around this, I went into my archives. I am a subscriber to Time magazine. Biased it may be, what it may be, but it is a platform that records contemporary politics and social issues. And hey presto, I'm going to show you two copies of the Time magazine. I haven't even opened them. I think I probably kept them, hoping I'll make money out of it someday. But this one is open. This magazine is the inauguration copy of President Obama when it was inaugurated. Okay, thank you, Shola. So that is the dream. So we have a black president in 2008. That's Obama and Michelle Obama. That's one copy. January 20, 2009. Then I have here an open copy of the commemorative issue of President Donald Trump, who was inaugurated in when was it now? January 30, 2017. And here is copy by Time magazine, and this is important for the contemporary issues in America, where without President Donald Trump on the cover, but the magazine describes him as Donald Trump, President of the Divided States of America. That is the caption. Donald Trump, President of the Divided States of America. That again comes into context when we're analyzing his response, his handling of the George Floyd affair. When we now look at the contemporary issue in America today, the George Floyd killing, one of the books I had in my library, which I was going to recommend for people to have, is a book on the history of American slavery. If I find the link, I'll put it on the page. The history of American slavery it's just shrouded in a lot of, it is very well known. There's much been written about it. But what is also not known, or not well known, is that not all the slaves were black people. There were also white slaves. There were a lot of Irish people who were enslaved in America, and things like that went on. But the most poignant enslavement in America was of the shipment by the British, the Portuguese, and the Spanish of Africans from Africa to the USA and the New World, so to speak. How do we come to that kind of understanding of how that matters in George Floyd? And for me to get back to the root of that, I think one of the ways in which one can look at it was that the black person was considered to be property, just chattel. And of course, one of the main reasons why the Americans fought the Civil War was about the abolition of slavery, where the northern industrial states wanted to abolish slavery because they could hire people and do business, whereas the agrarian rural South depended on slave labor. It is still a factor today that most of the southern states of America, there's more racism against black people than in the north. I was checking the data for the killings of people in America, and you find that predominantly in Florida and some other parts of Georgia, I think one of the states in Texas, high number of police killing of black people. There's this they call it chattelization of the black life, which has become a kind of a white supremacist kind of agenda, where black people are seen as threats. And I would like to refer here to Barack Obama in his book. I'm going to refer to two parts of his book, because this book, Dreams from My Father, normally you would think it's just about his dreams from his father, but the opening 3 pages actually goes straight to the urban malaise about how black people and white would interact. So I'll get back to soon. But there's one part of it that I want to, there's this other book, The Audacity of Hope. It's a political book, really, where I'd like to draw attention to the understanding of why George Floyd was killed in that way. And Obama is describing here the black underclass and the problems that people have with dealing with the black people. And I'll read some part of it here. So these are the stories of those who didn't make it out of history's confinement, of the neighborhoods within the black community that housed the poorest of the poor, serving as repositories for all the scars of slavery and violence of Jim Crow, the internalized rage ignorance, the shame of men who could not protect their women or support their families, the children who grew up being told they wouldn't amount to anything and had no one there to undo the damage. There was a time, of course, when such deep intergenerational poverty could still shock a nation. When the publication of Michael Harrington's The Other America or Bobby Kennedy's visit to the Mississippi Delta would inspire outrage and a call to action. Not anymore. Today, the images of so-called underclass are ubiquitous, a permanent fixture in American popular culture, in film and TV, where they sorry for the break there, where they are the foil of choice for the forces of law and order, in rap music and videos, and it goes on. And then he says, rather than evoke our sympathy, our familiarity with the lives of the black poor has bred spasms of fear and outright contempt. But mostly it's bred indifference. Black men filling our prisons, black children unable to read or caught in a gangland shooting, black children unable to read, the black homeless sleeping on grates and in the parks of our nation's capital. We take these things for granted as part of the national order. A tragic situation, perhaps, but not one for which we are culpable, and certainly not something subject to change. The concept of a black underclass, separate, apart, alien in its behavior and in its values, has also played a central role in modern American politics. It was partly on behalf of fixing the black ghetto that Johnson's War on Poverty was launched. And we're talking about the affirmative action. When President Johnson, Lyndon B. Johnson, put forward affirmative action after the Civil Rights Bill was passed, the white elite condemned it. And of course, they saw the advantage that it had for the black people and African Americans, and they ridiculed it and destroyed it, and just so they can put the black people back where they belong. And Obama says here, a cottage industry grew within conservative think tanks, arguing not only that cultural pathologies, which is basically some kind of mind thing, rather than racism or structural inequalities built into our economy, were responsible for black poverty, but also that government programs like welfare, coupled with liberal judges who coddled criminals, actually made these pathologies worse. And so you have all these stereotypes on television. Images of innocent children with distended bellies were replaced with those of black looters and muggers. News reports focus on the black maid struggling to make ends meet, and more on the welfare queen who had babies just to collect a check. What was needed, conservatives argued, was a stern dose of discipline, more police, more prisons, more personal responsibility, and an end to welfare. And Obama concludes, he says, if such strategies could not transform the black ghetto, at least they would contain it and keep hardworking taxpayers from throwing good money out the bag. So Obama clearly understood that this conservative agenda, white conservative agenda, to put the black people in their place, and therefore directly of the state, the police, the the courts, to enforce discipline on the black people. And it is that kind of interpretation, that social interpretation, that we need people to be disciplined. People need to be in there, to take responsibility, that now lies behind the actions of the average white police officer in America, because they follow that conservative line of thought. Of course, it stands to reason that most of the white Americans follow the conservative belief. That's why they mostly vote Republicans, because you'll find that in American history, the Democrat governments have not as many as the Republican government. So the Americans, mostly white, are conservative, and they harbor a lot of these stereotype ideas. Ramon, well, thank you very much. Stereotype ideas about the African American being lazy and ungovernable and so on. So these are the kinds of ideas that came out of slavery and the dehumanization of the black person. And also, one thing that I mentioned, again, as part of this idea, we mustn't forget that there was, even after slavery was ended officially by law, there was a culture of lynching that took hold in America. And I think within about 65 years or so, about 5,000 black people were lynched in parts of America just because they were black people. They were going around the street doing their own business and so on. So what has now happened is that the George Floyd is now being described as lynching, been seen as another way in which the white enforcers of the white norm are now using official violence, that is police force, prison services, to lynch black men and black women where they come. So this is a worrisome development. It's a worrisome development that has roots in the past. Thank you. Shiji, Adeliju, thank you very much. So this development is not new, it's not recent, but I think what has then happened is exactly where I'm going to go back to quickly, which is to go back to Trump, President Trump. President Donald Trump, I think if we have to think of a US president in recent terms who has been insulted and spoken to quite disdainfully by a lot of serious people in America, around the world, you can't find anybody else who comes close to that. Because when the Time magazine named him Person of the Year and said the president of the divided America, the interpretation is not just the fact, for example, as we know from this Zoom conference he had, or teleconference he had with the governors, the way he has divided the country and spoke to governors and mayors as if they are just hired help, and that's the principle of it, that they're just like hired help. And those of them who are not banging the fist and telling the black people to get off the streets and shoot them down and so on, so they're almost like they're almost like the slave master who is not cracking the whip enough. And that is the state of America today, where there is a president in the country who is known to have very thin skin, who is very intemperate, and hides behind his Twitter feed to insult people and wind people up, so to speak, who doesn't recognize his position as a leader of a country that has complex issues over a long, delicate history. So what is the responsibility that he has to George Floyd? That is the question. If you are regarded as the father of the nation, aren't you expected to show compassion, first of all, and call for restraint in a sensible way? I think a very good example of what that kind of attitude is that this is not new. I think when you put side by side what happened to President Obama and the insults, the racial insults that President Trump directed personally at the USA president by questioning his birth, questioning his loyalties, questioning his family origin, and all kind of stuff. If he could do that to the man who was the US president, what do you expect him to think of ordinary George Floyd? So, the president has failed in his responsibility to the American people. He has ignited a fever which isn't likely to die down. But that is not where it ends. And I'm going to make some points here about what has been waiting and what we are currently going on to address what should happen next. What should be the legacy of George Floyd's unfortunate death? Now, I was talking about the great speech by Martin Luther King, and that's where I come to now. In that speech, he made a specific statement which I want to reference with the contemporary issue going on. If any of you watched the interview by the chief of police for Houston, who was very, very angry, and he's one that told the president to shut up if he got nothing better to say. You know, he put it very bluntly. If you got nothing better to say, just shut up. I can't imagine any worse insults to be given that come from a so-called a small man to such a big man. But of course, being a big man doesn't mean about the office, but what's in your mind and your faculties. So you can be very small-minded, even though you occupy a big office. So what the guy said after he was making his points was that there are two kinds of people who are on the streets. Some of them are the people who are really angry and really want to make a difference. Of course, you have the looters and the opportunists. But then he said that among those people protesting, rioting today, are those who never voted. They never went out to cast a vote when it matters because they say they couldn't be bothered. It won't make a difference. Now you'll see. He was saying, now you see what happens when you don't vote. And I think we should go back to the election campaign for Trump and Hillary Clinton. How the African-American community deserted Hillary Clinton and allowed, by a margin, Clinton to come into the White House. Secondly, I now reference that to what Dr. King said in that great speech. In that speech, Dr. King said, and I quote him, I read him here. I'll read a bit before and I get to it. He said, "We cannot be satisfied as long as the Negro's basic nobility is from a smaller ghetto to a larger one. We can never be satisfied as long as our children are stripped of their selfhood and robbed of their dignity, quote, for whites only, end quote. We cannot be satisfied, and this is where it's getting important, we cannot be satisfied as long as a Negro in Mississippi cannot vote and a Negro in New York believes he has nothing for which to vote." And I think that is where the police chief and Martin Luther King agree. That the African American must find a reason to vote and to take part sensibly and with a commitment when there are elections to be held. We need to look at ways in which the institutional obstacles that prevent African Americans from voting at elections are overcome. And I know there's a lot of work going on among the Congressional Black Congress and also NAACP, many people doing a lot of things. But it is time on an individual level that every African American realizes that it is unsafe not to vote or to become misguided that on some kind of principle you're going to vote for a demon. And this is, again, part of the conflict that happens in society. And I hold it of the voting, because what I'm going to say next is going to come from another book, which actually addresses the issue of African consciousness. What's in our mind? What are the parameters on which we decide our future and the future of future generations? So let's look at that. And so it is this book which Thomas Pakenham. I've had it since I was in university many years ago when I was studying history, and it is this book called The Scramble for Africa. Anyone who's got time, and since we're in lockdown, it's quite a chunky book. If you got time, get a copy of that. I'm sure it is almost like the Bible of how Europeans went to take over Africa and subdued it. Okay, and subdued Africa and turned the people into what inauthentic African consciousness. So what I'm going to paraphrase about this book is that what we see today about the decision by our people, African American people, not to vote or participate in public affairs is rooted in the consciousness. And I know, of course, that we had in the early 20th century, Marcus Garvey and all those guys, doing a lot of Africanism and African consciousness. But independence of mind. Unfortunately, what we have today in the black mind, whether in Africa itself or in the African diaspora, or you find in African American communities, is this we're now going to subdue everything that is important to us on the basis of religion. And that is why you'll find African Americans and Nigerians, Africans, even in the African continent, who are supporters of President Trump. I find it very absurd that that is a reality that we are facing. And all is based on some kind of identification of Christian values in President Trump, and as him being a champion of some Christian war or some battle that he's fighting. And it's very sad. So I think part of the work that needs to be done is that refocusing our minds. And the African American work has been done. But what that police officer said and what Martin Luther King said is that if you don't take part in politics, if you don't cast your vote and cast it for the right people on a broad spectrum, you end up giving your liberty away to a despot. Because what Trump has become in America is he's going to be a despot now, willing to use power to punish the slaves. And that is part of the rhetoric that they want to keep on engaging, to create fear and division and anxiety. Thankfully, people are on the streets and they're not cowed by this attitude. Right. So, having gone through that cycle, I'm going to end I'm going to go back to this book of great speeches, and I'm going to go to this speech by Nelson Mandela, where Mandela was being sentenced to life imprisonment, and he had to make this speech to talk about what this means to him and his people, and why we're willing to go to jail for that. And He says here, our fight is against real and not imaginary hardships, or to use the language of the state prosecutor, so-called hardships. Basically, we fight against two features which are the hallmarks of African life. This could be African American life in South Africa or America, and which are entrenched by legislation. These features are poverty and lack of human dignity, and we do not need communists or so-called agitators to teach us about these things. So he said, South Africa is the richest country in Africa, but it is the land of remarkable contrasts. The whites enjoy what may be the highest standard of living in the world, whilst Africans live in poverty and misery. Poverty goes hand in hand with malnutrition and disease. Tuberculosis, pellagra, and scurvy bring death and destruction of health. The complaint of Africans, however, isn't only that they are poor and the whites are rich, and that's America for you, but that the laws which are made by the whites are designed to preserve this situation. He said there are two ways to break out of poverty. The first is by formal education, and the second is by the worker acquiring a greater skill in his work and thus higher wages. As far as Africans are concerned, both these avenues of advancement are deliberately curtailed by legislation. This is the reality of America today for African Americans. They are stuck in a rut, and their frustrations that they have are latent. And people carry on, they soldier on. We use religion, they do different kind of things and try and get by. Yet, the establishment doesn't want to give the outlet as much as she should be, and it's a stigmatization of the black person in America. Now, having made those comparisons, I have put on the page, there's a book that has been written by a former police officer, and the book is called the Black and the Blue, and talks about the crimes and the racism and the injustice that is perpetrated by the American police. I think it's worth reading. If you get the time, drop by on the page and you can have a look at it if you want to buy it, if you want to borrow it somewhere, or there'll probably be a PDF of it available somewhere. Just get it and get better insight into that, into the world of the police, American police, and what they do to ordinary folk. I don't think we need to go far to see how many African American people have been killed and murdered for flimsy excuses, and you see the contrast. Then somebody, I think there was a picture, this young white chap that murdered about 15, 16 people in his school, and when the police came, they gave him a cup of water for him to calm down. You could imagine if a black, if an African American man, a black person, was the one who had been reported, shooting in a school or in a church, and the police arrive and they'll give me a cup of water to calm down. Those are the kind of contrasts that really wind people up, and people ask why. Well, we know why. I think the reason is shown by history. There are a lot of rogue cops, racist cops, systematic discrimination, institutionalized racism in the system, and the mindsets of some people of superiority and the white supremacist agenda, which has been known to be championed by the current US president, by his retweeting of such obnoxious, regrettable updates from such groups. So what's the way out? People need to calm down. Eventually, we need to get back to some kind of normality, and but people should take the cue from that very lovely man, the Houston police chief, and take the cue. What are you going to do on a personal level? when the time comes for you to cast a vote, are you going to re-elect Trump because he's a Christian? Or are you going to, re-elect him because he has 1 or 2 or 3 African Americans in his cabinet? And these are people who have no say. He disregards them. He treats them with disdain. Just does what he likes. This is not a time for tokenism. This is a time for affirmative action, affirming your own citizenship. Get out and go and organize, and do the numbers, and get some votes to vote out Trump in November. That is the way to send a message. Fortunately, not all white people are racists. We all know that. In the sea of humanity, it is not possible to have people like that. And you can see from the demonstrations, from the protests, it's a wide rainbow, it's a rich rainbow of supporters. We're talking about the establishment. We're talking about a president who is determined to fill the Supreme Court with right-wing conservative people. And these people, the common denomination is a disdain for minorities. And if I'm going to cloak it, the extremism, conservative agenda is always ultimately against the interest of the ordinary black people or minorities in the country. Otherwise, no one's going to build a wall against the Mexicans if the people at the top don't agree it makes sense. On that note, I think I'll just go back and sing goes out on with this beautiful rendition by the choir of the Glee Club choir of the Morehouse College. Of course, Morehouse College in Atlanta, one of the finest schools in the world, and one of the top black, I think probably the first, I think is the second black university in America after Howard, I think it is. Yeah, I think Howard is. Got it mixed up. But it's been, I hope it's been a good time to look into the literature and kind of contextualize and bring together the different elements of that representation. What we see, a black man being pinned down for 8 minutes. Last time I checked my watch, it was about 10 minutes ago. So to have somebody put his knee on somebody's neck and on his chest and compress him for 8 minutes, that is the height of the depth of brutality and total inhumanity. In fact, when I see that picture, because I haven't watched the video, it might just make me go a bit silly. I've seen the picture, but it reminds me of time in during the Christmas or Salah or Ramadan, when families in Africa do the slaughtering of the ram. Very, very similar kind of imagery. You have somebody pinned down, an animal pinned down to slaughter it and take a knife out. The only thing he didn't have in his hand was a knife to cut the guy's throat. That is exactly the kind of imagery that it conjures in me. And that's so visible, evident, that cop deserves to face the music for his actions. So on that note, I'll see you again next week. I'll be trying to get some ahead of the game and put some literature out. If we want to suggest some books that we want to share, people want to share, just throw a book or anything on the page and say, oh, you want to recommend this book for others to read. Anything, it could be a book around this subject, if it's something interesting you found out. It could be a book about books, a book about talking, a book about music, anything that interests you. Just put a book that you can share with people and put it on the page. So until next week, let's listen to the choir. may the soul of George Floyd rest in peace. Thank you very much, and have a good evening. Thank you very much.